Okay, so this video is gonna talk about chapter 4, socioeconomic disparities in health. So this chapter is a continuation of chapter 3, but more into how disparities come into place and how do we explain it. Okay, so let's dive in. In the previous chapter, we talked about Grossman model. Grossman model says that individuals make choices about their health based on time constraints, budget constraints, and their utility function. At the end, everyone chooses their optimal amount of health, which is noted as H star. And H star changes based on all the decisions about these trade-offs. So how does socioeconomic status, we might call it SES, affect health and choices about health? Does health determine SES? Or in the other way, does SES determine health? Or does something else determine health disparities and SES at the same time? So we're gonna use many empirical evidence to explore these questions. First, we want to look at the pervasiveness of health disparities. Health disparities are everywhere. First, health disparity is defined as differences in health. It can be incidence, prevalence, mortality, burden of disease between different specific populations. So for example, death rates for all cancer types for both men and women are highest among African Americans. Okay, so that would be health disparity between African Americans and the other groups. Health disparities are ubiquitous worldwide across races, educational attainments, employment grades, and income. We just broadly group them into socioeconomic statuses, or SES. Okay, so this is one example, breast cancer. We can see that different color lines is different time trends for different races. And some races are higher, for example, the yellow line, which is white. And some races are lower, let's say the blue line or the green line. I believe there are two different green lines here. So be careful about the shape. The one on the higher green one is all races. Okay. This next graph is death rates in breast cancer. So remember in the previous graph, okay, in the previous graph, whites has the highest rates of breast cancer. Okay, the yellow one is the highest, but here whites is not the one with the highest death rate. Okay, however, black is the one, the race that with the highest death rates in breast cancer. We can see that there's an obvious trend that shows a declining death rates in breast cancer over time. This could be due to people have better technology, but had better access to healthcare. But this gap between different races persists over time. Another example, if we look at by education, we know that college graduates are 25% more likely to survive to age 68 than high school dropouts. By race, Hispanics report better health status than Black individuals. White individuals report better health than both Hispanic and white individuals. Health deteriorates with age across all races, but this disparities persist. This page is an evidence supporting what we just talked about. In this graph, male survival curves by educational attainment. The highest line, the solid black line, is college graduates. So the survival rate is higher than the high school dropouts at all ages, but slowly decreases. Okay. The gray line at the bottom is the difference in survival. So the differences expands all the way to around 80, and the difference slowly decreases. This next one is health by race. So the y-axis is self-reported health. So it's a little bit misguiding because worse health is on the top, better health is at the bottom. So if you move up, then health becomes worse. So in this graph, as people age, different race groups' health becomes worse, while non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black becomes worse faster, or is worse than Hispanic or non-Hispanic white. And we can also see that the gap between these three different lines persists. The next graph is another evidence for race, but also with some evidence on income. So different color bars represent different income level as percent of poverty line. Okay, so this light blue bar on the left is lower or equals to 100% times poverty line. Oops. So these are the poorest of among these four different income groups, and they report the lowest life expectancy at age 25. While this is true, if we look across race, Black reports even lower life expectancy than Hispanic and whites. Okay. Okay, so another evidence that shows historical health disparities on England and Dunkle families. I'm not sure about how this one is related because we don't have a lot of background on this, so we're gonna pass on this one. Okay, so the conclusion here is that generally high-income individuals self-report a higher health status than those of lower incomes. For most conditions, the poor exhibits more incidence of disease, which makes sense and should be obvious to most of us. But there are some exceptions, like bronchitis. This is a very special condition, and we find that there is no difference between different income groups. Another one is hay fever. And it shows that the rich appears to be diagnosed with hay fever more often than the poor. We want to explain why is that, and it could be explainable if the rich children visit the doctors more often and hence are more likely to be diagnosed. Okay, so here are three different graphs that two different graphs that shows what we just talked about. If we separate people into different age groups and we draw them across income, axis is log family income. We can see that as income goes up, all of these lines are downward sloping, are decreasing, which means that self-reported health is becoming better. Okay, because y-axis is self-reported health in terms of worse is higher, better is lower. Okay. All right, so this graph is the same with most conditions, but for bronchitis in the middle and for hay fever it's a little bit different. We think of that as a lot of different issues playing here, but for most conditions it's consistent with the previous graph. Okay. Our next question is it because people cannot afford insurance that has contributed to all of these income disparities in health? And the answer is not completely, because even in countries with universal health insurance, health disparities persist across income groups. For example, in Canada, self-reported health status for children at high SES better than children of low SES. Okay, so we this is the graph for that study. Low SES has higher percentage in poor health, versus high SES, the line in the bottom, has relatively a lower percentage in poor health. And this gap expands as these children gets older. So we want to come up with theories to explain it. Okay, if it's not because of universal health care, then universal health insurance, then it is what? So we come up with a bunch of theories, and we want to look into them one by one to see if we have any empirical evidence in support of all of these theories. So there is early life events, income level, stress of being poor, work capacity in patients, and adherence to medical advice. It is important to understand them, because once we understand the cause and the true cause, okay, or the true reasons that has contributed to these health disparities, then policymakers can make better policy decisions to target these reasons. Among these theories, they have different directions. Okay, so some theories believe that it is the SES that contributes to the differences or disparities in health. Some theories believe that it is the disparity in health that has contributed to a difference in SES. While one other theory thinks that no, it's not because of these two, it's something else that has contributed to the disparity in both health and SES. Okay, so these are the hypotheses. Okay. There's efficient producer, thrifty, phenotype, direct income, allostatic load, income inequality, access to care, productive time, and time preference. The last one even has a name. It's called the Fuchs hypothesis. So let's look at them one by one. The first one is efficient producer. So this hypothesis believes that better educated individuals are more efficient producers of health. Think of highly educated people. They are better in learning how to take better care of themselves, so that they has relatively a better health outcome that they produce on their own. Okay, and Grossman model supports this. Grossman model predicts that people who are more efficient health producers will have a higher H star. So one study found that an additional year of schooling caused 1.7 years increase in life expectancy in the 1920s. So hence, education improves health. Okay, so then what are the possible causal mechanisms? When we talk about causal, we're talking about reason and results versus just a correlation. Okay, so what are the possible reasons for this possible positive correlation? Because positive correlation is what we observed, and causal mechanisms is what we have to prove. Okay. So, for example, lessons in school can help students to take better care of themselves. For example, if they learn biology, then of course they learn more about their body and how to keep it healthy, right? Secondly, schools help students be more patient when it comes to payoff of investments. And Grossman model says that health is an investment. So students therefore learned how to invest in health. The third one is better educated people are more likely to adhere to treatment regimens. They probably wouldn't listen to some false treatments or some conspiracy theories to do on their health. They're more willing to listen to good authorities' advice to take care of themselves. And I think this is something that we can see in the pandemic. Yeah. Okay. Another study that studies people with two diseases, HIV and type 1 diabetes. So if someone is diagnosed with these two diseases, then they need very intensive patient participation in order to get the treatment. So this study finds out that better educated HIV patients, they had a better self-reported adherence. They are more willing to follow what the doctors tell them to do. For patients with diabetes, they randomized interventions that promotes intensive adherence. And they find out that the less schooling people have, the more effective the intervention is on future adherence, which means that because they have a relatively lower level of adherence at the beginning. Okay, so that is the first theory. Let's look at the next one. The next one is called Thrifty phenotype hypothesis. Okay, so this one is less of a health economics theory. It's more of a biological genetics reason. So this theory, this hypothesis thinks that there is a genetic reasons for being inefficient at producing health. And the theory simply says that if a baby or an infant experience deprivation of resources or food in utero and early childhood, it can lead to an activation of their thrifty genes. What these genes do is that they are useful for sparse environmental conditions, but bad in conditions of abundance. So these people, when they face abundance, they eat more, or they eat more unhealthy foods. So they're more likely to develop diabetes, obesity, and other disorders later in life. Disparities arise because poorer individuals are more likely to have resource deprivation early in life. Okay, so since they talked about this hypothesis, they have to prove it. So we know that the most efficient way to provide evidence is to do a randomized control trial. But it is unethical if you randomly assign mothers or babies into a deprived environment, right? It's quite unethical to do that. So an experiment, a lab experiment, sounds impossible. So then what we want to do is, okay, if I cannot find a lab experiment, then let's find a natural experiment. Okay, so natural experiment occurred without people's will. Sometimes it could be an earthquake or a famine or a snowstorm that is unexpected, so that people just unexpectedly experience some environment of deprivation. And we want to look at these babies versus some babies at the same period of time, but without experiencing these kind of deprivation. So good natural experiments can eliminate selection bias. And we're going to talk about selection bias in the future. It's very important because if some people, they are capable of avoiding such kinds of natural disasters, for example, then if we are comparing these people with the people who are unable to avoid, then we're not comparing apple to apple. Okay, so we want a good experiment, good natural experiment that is unexpected enough that people are not able to select themselves in or out of an experiment, so that we can treat them as an experiment that delivers similar results as a lab experiments. Okay, so the study they find is Dutch famine in World War II. They find out that in Holland, they suffered a famine due to a German blockade of food. And so this famine created two baby groups. One group of babies are in utero during the famine, and another group conceived after the famine. Okay, so these two groups, we think of them are apple and apple, okay, except that one experienced deprivation in utero. So hopefully there is no selection bias, because when the famine happened, if a mother is already pregnant, she cannot manipulate around it, okay? Okay, so the babies in utero during famine, they find out that has higher rates of diabetes and obesity in their adulthood. So if we believe that this is a study without selection bias, then this is a good evidence in support of the Thrifty phenotype hypothesis. This is the result table of that study. These three different columns are different babies groups. The first column is late gestation during famine. The second group is early gestation during famine. The third group is conceived after famine. Okay, so we can see that the first group has higher type 2 diabetes, although it's not significant, and has higher HDL cholesterol, has lower obstructive airway disease, has lower general health poor. And then the early gestation during famine. But if we combine the first two columns, we can see that it's significantly worse than the baby groups that conceived after famine. Okay, so here are some other evidence. There's not enough context here, so you guys can read it on your own. I'm gonna move on to the next hypothesis, which is direct income hypothesis. This one is very direct. It simply says that disparity exists because rich people have more resources to devote to health. They have a larger budget constraint, and therefore they are able to choose a bundle that has a higher H star. The next one, allostatic load hypothesis. So this hypothesis says that prolonged or repeated stress is unhealthy and can cause an increased rate of aging. In Grossman model, aging is represented by the rate of depreciation in health capital. So if someone experiences stressful days all the time, then this person may just get old faster. Okay, so this is allostatic load hypothesis. One study called Whitehall study, they compared health status of two groups of British civil servants. British civil servants relatively homogeneous in backgrounds and share workplace environments. All British citizens have the same access to healthcare through the National Health Service. They find out that disease morbidity and mortality rates are highest for low-grade civil servants. And and low-grade civil servants are the groups that reported more stressful work and home environments than the other groups. So this could be an evidence in support of the allostatic load hypothesis that because they have a more stressful work, so they just have a worse health condition. Problems of this study, however, it is not a lab experiment. It is also not a natural experiment. People can choose if they are going to work in the stressful work environment, right? And we think that, okay, maybe people who are subject to worse health are not able to choose the work that they desire, which is less stressful. So they end up getting a job that is more stressful, and they are observed that they have worse health. But maybe it's not because of the work is more stressful. Maybe it's because they are just less healthy and they end up getting those jobs. So we cannot confirm that this is a complete story of this hypothesis, but this is a study that can support the hypothesis in some degree. Okay. This is a graph of the results in the Whitehall study. Civil servants, high grade, low grade. We can see that these people have a higher HDL cholesterol. Okay. All right, so the next hypothesis is income inequality hypothesis. So income inequality hypothesis believes that health disparities are caused by an unequal distribution of income in a society that is very unequal, or in a society that is very segregated and extreme. We think of that society as a very stressful society. Okay, and so this is related to the allostatic load hypothesis that if a society has a high inequality, then it leads to more stress for people who are in the lower parts of the income distribution, and therefore makes the society's health disparities persist. The policy implications for this one is that if this theory is true, then policymakers should aim at reducing inequality instead of investing in healthcare services. Okay. And another thing is that the health status of a society may decline even if the average income rises, if the income becomes more concentrated. Okay. But this one is hard to find evidence because we cannot randomly assign societies into different level of inequality. Even if we compare countries with different level of inequality, it is still hard to rule out selection bias. So this hypothesis is just a hypothesis. It's very hard to draw causal conclusion about whether it's true or not. The next one, access to care hypothesis. This one says that those with high incomes can afford more generous health insurance compared to those of low income. I would say this one is very similar to the one with direct income hypothesis. Okay, but health disparities persist in countries with universal health insurance. For example, in Canada and Britain, these two countries have very good equal access to healthcare, but health disparities persist. The next one is productive time hypothesis. This theory takes a different direction. It believes that the differences in SES are caused by disparities in health. It is because people who are less healthy end up not working as much or end up not being as productive, which leads to the differences in their SES status. Do we have any evidence in support of this? The answer is yes. There are 2 studies that look at siblings growing up in the same household, and they find out that those with a worse health during their infancy will have a higher mortality rates and lower educational achievements and lower adult earnings. Okay, so this is a different direction. It is because it looks at SES outcome that is triggered by different level of health in their infancy. This graph is, I believe this graph is one of the evidence for the productive hypothesis. This map shows estimated number of malaria deaths per 100,000 inhabitants in 1920. The states with a darker color means that there are more mosquitoes in those places. And in that time, mosquitoes can make babies die. So these states have a higher rate of malaria death. And so they find out that babies born in states and years in which temperatures are ideal for these kind of mosquitoes breeding are substantially more likely to end up in poverty in 1960 than babies born in other states or in other times. Okay, so this evidence, oh, and they also tend to end their schoolings early in life. So this evidence shows that, okay, if babies have experienced worse health due to more mosquitoes in that year or that area, then it could end up in disparities in SES. Okay, so here comes our final hypothesis, the Fuchs hypothesis. This hypothesis is a name for time preference. So this hypothesis believes that they don't cause each other. It's something else. It's a third factor that's time preference that causes both. And Fuchs believes that some people, they value today's money much more than tomorrow's. So then they value today's utility much more than tomorrow's. Then they will not do a lot of things to maximize tomorrow's health or tomorrow's return. They want to have all the fun today. And this is something that has effect in both our education and our health. For example, if we are patient, we are willing to sacrifice today's earning for tomorrow's, then we're willing to go to the school today instead of going to work in a Starbucks, and we are willing to learn more so that in tomorrow we can earn more money. This is the same thing with health. If we want to have more health tomorrow or when we retire, then today we're willing to go to exercise, or today we're willing to eat more healthy foods instead of having all the fun, eating all the junk foods that makes us happy today. And this is Fuchs hypothesis says that this time preference in terms of how you value the utility between today and in the future is the reason that changes people's decision today and leads to disparities in both health and SES. Okay, so in conclusion, I skipped 3 graphs. Let me jump to this conclusion first. So the first 5 theories or hypotheses are in explaining why SES can contribute to the health disparities. The 6th one, productive time, believes that it is disparity in health that has causes differences in SES. And the last one, the time discounting or time preference or Fuchs hypothesis, believes that it's a third factor that has contributed to both disparities. And there are many empirical evidence supporting each of them. And therefore, this is why it's not just about universal healthcare. It's a lot of other things that has contributed to the persistence of health disparities. About the 3 pages that I just skipped, here is about health disparities in policy. So in 2014, one of the biggest news is the expansion of ACA. So Affordable Care Act expanded a lot of access to insurance. First, it expanded Medicaid. So for individuals that earns up to 133% of federal poverty level are now eligible. So that can eliminate almost half of the people that are not eligible for Medicaid. It regulated insurance. It tells insurance company that they cannot deny people with pre-existing conditions. It also regulates health benefit exchanges. It regulates healthcare workforce and cultural competence, community health centers, prevention and healthness and wellness. And it also provides funding for maternal and child health, because we know that a lot of studies look at early life and have provide evidence that early life is the one that has the longest persisting consequences. So they provide funding for maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program. Okay, so that's one example of policy making in order to solve or target the problem of health disparities. So that's about this chapter. We know that there are still many other problems in terms of health disparities. It's not one question that can fit everything in. So we're gonna continue to talk about disparities in the future several chapters.